What is up, everybody? Today I'm going to be pulling the power steering rack out of the Miata and fully depowering it. I have had it partially depowered for about 3 years, no power steering pump and no fluid in the rack at all. It's just basically been drained out and capped. That is not actually a depowered rack or a manual rack. You need to fully remove the entire steering shaft out of the rack and cut out the little sleeve or collar that is inside of the steering rack that controls the fluid pressure from the driver's side to the passenger side. That creates friction inside of the steering rack if you don't have any fluid in there. Today I'm going to take that completely apart, rebuild and refresh my power steering rack to make sure it is nice and smooth and feels really good on the track. So when we look at the steering rack down here, it is this piece right in the front on the Miata. It's right in front of the subframe, very easy to get to. There's just a 14mm here and right here, and it basically can come right out. You do need to loosen up a bolt that is up on the steering shaft up there. It's kind of hard to see. And then you have to either take the outer tie rods out with the rack, or you remove them from the rack and leave them attached to your knuckles. I'm going to leave the outer tie rods in the vehicle attached to the knuckle. We'll just loosen up the bolt that's underneath this boot, slide the boot over, and do the same thing over there, and then just leave those in the vehicle. Then I don't have to readjust those or anything. They just hang down out of the way, and then the rack can come right out because we don't need the tie rods in the rack when we're doing the disassembly of the rack. Well, let's get to pulling some of this stuff off. We got to take off some spinny twisty deals on the boots so that the boot can slide off out of the way. And then we have some clamps that we have to adjust and pull out as well. Basically, I'm just gonna squeeze that open so that this boot can just slide down the tie rod out here, just like that. Now I have rack spacers in here as well. Those rack spacers will just stay in here. So with removing my outer tie rod from my rack spacer and rack, I have a 1-inch wrench up here. And I have my really big adjustable wrench because I don't have, I want to say it's 1 1/4 inches. So we'll take my big adjustable wrench, get that size down there. I might actually be able to just loosen it up without having to use the 1-inch. Yeah, because this is a pretty big wrench, lots of torque on it. Well, I was kind of wondering why my alignment keeps changing, or that it was so weird and messed up at the last event. It's because the heim joint on the passenger side is bent. I got the steering rack pulled out. I had to just put the camera down and get that steering knuckle off of there. It has never came off before. Very rusty, it was stuck on there. So I gotta brush that out with a wire brush. And I'll probably put some anti-seize on that as well, just so that in the future, if I have to take this back out, that'll come off a lot easier. We are going to start the disassembly process of your power steering rack for your Miata. We first have to loosen up this 14mm and the collar around it. This is the steering rack tensioner. This puts pressure on the pinion inside so that it's not just sloppy and loose. You want to loosen that up a little bit first and probably just pull that all the way out. Then you have a 21mm on the bottom that secures the actual shaft in place. We want to take all of those out, and then we will remove the pinion, shaft, and the gear as one whole piece. There's a snap ring that holds that in, and then a dust cover that is inside there as well. We're going to pull all of that apart, and then we should be able to pull this shaft out. I believe there is another snap ring down in here as well. You kind of need to go inside this little hole and push that ring up and out so that you can actually pop the ring out of place, and then remove that dust shield as well. Once you have that bottom cap off, It is a 17 millimeter inside. Once you have that out, there's a little bearing on the inside that has to come out as well. Now we should be able to take out this snap ring off the top. Squish it. I'll need 2 hands and my screwdriver for this, and to kind of hold this in place. There we go. I'll have to clean and brush that too. It's pretty rusty, so that it all reassembles nice and easy. We should just be able to work that right out. There's old power steering fluid in there that we're going to clean off of that, and we're just going to get grease packed in that instead. We got these rubber gaskets. We're just going to fill that with grease and then clean out the old grease from the gears. Make sure it's nice and clean when we reassemble. Now we just have to get this snap ring out of this side. We take our small little screwdriver and just press up like that. I might need a second one to be able to pop it out from here, or I can get it popped enough where it can just work its way around, just like that. Perfect. We got to clean that out as well. That's pretty nasty and ishy and dirty. Everything needs to be cleaned. Now we just got to get that popped out, the dust cover. And it might not want to come out because it's dirty and ishy in here too. There we go. Just like that. There was still some squishy sound coming out of the rack too, and that was the leftover power steering fluid that was still inside there. And I'll show you what we're actually going to be taking off here. That piece has to come out. We're going to clean that and make sure it's nice and clean. We don't want that full of grit and dirt. Now this is the actual shaft that's inside of the power steering rack. What we are cutting off is this ring right here, right in the center. All right, we have that center seal cut off of the shaft. Those are all the pieces. They are still pretty warm, so I'm kind of juggling them in my hand. But yeah, that's those pieces. We're not going to use that anymore. We don't need that. We don't have power steering. So set those off to the side. I'm going to clean out these grooves so there's not any grit or anything left in those. And then I now have to take a brush and clean out all of those gears, or like the teeth for the gears for the pinion, and make sure this thing is all polished up and clean so that we can then reinsert it into the rack and get this rebuild on the way. All right, so what I am going to do to get this prepared to reassemble, I am going to take large globs of grease and just basically smear it in here, because there's a secondary bearing down farther in that we're not going to be able to take out and clean up. So I'm just going to get more grease packed down in there so it is nice and lubricated and we won't have any binding issues inside of the rack. So literally just packing as much as we can inside that. Now we're going to flip it to this next side. We're going to drop more grease down inside of here. This is where that collar sits. So we're just going to get tons of grease packed down in here, because this is going to be what lubricates the entire system. There is not going to be power steering fluid in this at all anymore. I'll go in through the third hole here. Smear that around in there. We don't want it to be puking out this side, but we do want it to be nice and coated all the way through and around. I don't know if you'll be able to really see in there, but I have it all packed in and up on the top. Might actually get a little more in the top here because there is a full sleeve that goes in the top as well. Now we have that nice and greased up. I'm gonna set that down. We now are going to make sure our other hand is clean. We're going to lubricate this sleeve because the steering shaft goes through this, and then this collar sits and can rotate in there as well. It's held in with a snap ring. We're just making sure that it's got a nice layer of grease all the way around on that. There is a couple of seals inside here as well. We're just going to smear grease on that so they are also lubricated where the steering shaft is going through here. Don't have to really grease the outside or the exterior on this side because it's on the outside of the shaft. There's nothing going to be contacting that. We're going to get this O-ring that seals it all off, get that lubricated, and just set that off to the side just like so. Now we're going to lubricate this sleeve, because there's a little sleeve on here that keeps the tension on the steering shaft inside of the rack. We get that collar greased up good, and then the dust cap there as well. I'm going to set that off to the side. I do have to clean out that other bearing, the exterior bearing, real quick, so we'll clean that out and then pack that as well. Now we have to lubricate and grease the pinion gears, taking a big glob of that grease and packing it down into those gears. If there is excess, leave it on there. You want as much grease in that gear as you can, because you don't want just metal on metal grinding away in there. And then we're also going to put some up in here, because there's little gasket sealers in there. We don't want those just sitting in there dry, because those do turn with the pinion gear. Kind of pack some grease into those sleeves, and we should be all set. I'm guessing there's going to be a ton that'll squish out of here. That's alright, we'll clean that up later. Now that's a big mess of grease. We'll just set that down, and we'll move on to the next part, which is then lubricating the gears on the steering shaft themselves. Just pack that grease in there, get those gears as full as you can get them. Run that grease both directions so it's fully packed. If there is excess, that is alright. We want as much on there as we can get. And we'll just put kind of a light layer right around that as well, and that should be a-okay. Just run the excess grease that's on your hands over the rest of the steering shaft, and we'll set that aside. Now clean up our hands so that we can insert this back into the steering rack. Now we are going to reassemble this. We're going to slide this collar back in on this top side. Get that pressed all the way in. Now we will slide the steering shaft back in here nice and carefully. There is also a seal down in the middle that we just have to be careful and cautious about. Kind of in the middle, just like that. Now we want to have the steering gears face towards the back of the rack. There's a lot of grease in here. We don't want that in where those threads are. Pop that out quick. Now you want that faced so the gears are pointed towards the back of the steering rack. Now before we go any further on this side, we do need to put this snap ring back in up here. We just got to make sure that the ring is put back in the same spot, so if we need to take this apart again, we're able to get it back in the same spot. Have it spun just a little. Nice and tight there. It's clicked right in. We'll just take our screwdriver and make sure that it's actually pressed all the way into that groove in there. Looks like it. So that side is all sealed up. That side's ready to go. Now we can finish off this other side. We are going to get the pinion gear back in there. Should be good. Gotta make sure we press that down in real good so we can get this top snap ring back in. This one, I got that all cleaned up so it's nice and not rusty anymore. Get our snap ring tool and squish that together so it pops right in. Again, take the screwdriver, just make sure it's pressed in there. Now that top side is sealed up. You should be able to turn it and the steering shaft should move. We're all good to go there. Now we can flip it. We're going to slide the freshly packed bearing down onto this threaded piece here. Should slide in fairly easy. Take our screwdriver and just kind of make sure it's pressed down all the way. And then we got the nut. We'll get this tightened down. I'm sure there's probably a specific torque spec that you got to put this one to, and I could probably find it somewhere. We're just going to get it snug for the moment. And you will have to turn the steering rack all the way to one side so that it'll actually be able to tighten. We're just going to get this nice and snug, and we should be good to go right there. Now, we're going to actually smear some more grease down inside of this so that it can just pack down on the steering shaft. Now we can slide this collar back down in. Any of the excess grease that was down in there, it should just press down into the actual core of the steering rack. So we want that extra grease in there. And we got a spring, and then we have the cap. There is a torque for this. This sets the tension of your pinion. We are going to torque that to the spec and make sure that it is snug, and we'll probably readjust it once it's in the car as well. Let's slip that cap right over top. We're actually going to pack, I think, some more grease down into this cap as well, just to make sure there's plenty of grease down in there for those bearings. Like I said, no more power steering fluid in there. There's no liquid lubrication. It is all going to be grease. This bottom one, you can just get that tight. That does not have a torque spec on that. Just get it so it's tight. Don't overdo it. You don't have to wreck the threads or nothing. Just like so. Now we'll get this tightened up. Don't go super crazy. Like I'm saying, we gotta set that to a torque. It is approximately 44 inch-pounds. So we're gonna grab the torque wrench and then torque this down real quick. And there we go. We have the steering rack rebuilt, or refreshed rather. We took everything apart, re-greased everything, and made sure everything is nice and smooth inside. And we also took out the seal that's in the center that controls the fluid going back and forth. That basically just removes any extra friction that's inside the steering rack for a smoother feel, especially when you are depowered. Now we'll get this put back into the car. The reinstallation process of the steering rack is basically the same, but reverse order of pulling it out. So I'm just going to throw it in here real quick. It's very simple. You just slide the steering column piece back in on the top on the pinion shaft, and then the four 14mm bolts that clamp that down onto the subframe. We'll get that in there and I'll show you when it's done. There it is. We got the steering rack back in here, steering shaft reconnected, and I did recenter the rack and matched it to the steering wheel so that the rack is centered and the steering wheel is straight. I am not doing the alignment or anything just yet. I'm waiting on a Heim joint for the passenger side. I ordered that last night, so that should be coming in the mail hopefully by this weekend or this coming weekend, so we should be all set to go. We should have plenty of time to get that new Heim joint installed and the alignment set up in the front to where it's all straight, all good, and everything is nice and smooth. Well, it has been 2 weeks since that last clip that you just saw. I ordered those Heim joints and they showed up last weekend, but I made a mistake when ordering. I thought I would just get them ordered real quick. I was sitting in the garage rushing, clicked the wrong part number, and they arrived last Saturday, came out to put them in the car, and they were left-hand thread. There is 2 different styles of this Heim joint, left-hand thread and right-hand thread. That then delayed this project another week. Now I have the correct ones. We need to get these in the car and do the best we can getting this aligned. We'll go take it for a drive. I'm really excited to see what this fully depowered rack feels like and what it compares to with straight Heim joints in there, not these bent ones that I had in there. I'm not sure if this one bent at the last event or if this has been bent for a while, and the other one is bent this direction. So both of the Heim joints on the tie rod ends were bent. One was bent backwards, the other one was bent up. So Hopefully that's going to fix a little bit of the binding issue we were having as well. So now I'll get these things in and we'll start getting this thing aligned. So I just gave it a quick eyeball alignment while it was up on jack stands and just got the majority of the adjustments done. Now we'll look down the side, just looking at it from here. It's gonna be really hard for you guys to kind of tell, but I'm gonna give a guess before I put the plates on. I'm gonna give a guess that we're at least probably a 1/2 inch toe out. That's gonna be too far, just guessing right now. It could be actually closer than that, I don't know. I'm gonna try and get it to around 1/8 of an inch toe out. I wanna slow down the steering up front just a little bit. The Miata transitions so fast already. I just wanna slow it down a little bit. And you can do that by towing the car in a little bit. If you toe out, it's gonna snap really quick. It's gonna be very quick steering. And I just need to slow it down a little bit. So I'm gonna take it from the 1/4 inch toe out that I had it at to 1/8 of an inch toe out. It's not that much of a jump or a difference, but it can make a big difference on track. I think I got the car pretty well straightened out. I'm gonna take it for a little drive around the parking lot real quick just to make sure everything can kind of shake around, bounce around a little bit, and then pull back into the garage onto the flat concrete, and we'll check the alignment again. Hopefully it's pretty good. Hopefully it drives straight and the steering wheel doesn't turn one way or the other while it's driving straight. Everything hopefully will be nice and straight and true, and we won't have any issues. So I'm gonna take that for a quick drive around the parking lot, and I'll let you know in just a second. All right, hopefully it's not too bumpy for you guys. Well, right now the steering wheel is pretty straight. It's driving smooth, it's not shaking. The heims are still pretty tight. I just gotta get some driving on them to loosen them up a little bit because they're squeaking really bad, like almost like a rusty hinge on a door, but they're brand new and they're just tight like that. I just did a quick once over up in the front. Everything looks good, everything's still tight. I've only driven about a mile, but I just wanted to double check, give you guys an update on how this actually feels. So I've been driving it for about two and a half years, depowered. So that's basically just no power steering pump, and I emptied out all the fluid that was in the rack, right? That's how I've been driving it, as depowered. It's not fully depowered, it's not a fully manual rack. Yes, it's dry inside, or still had a little bit of fluid so it can move, but it's not completely a manual rack. Now it is, with that sleeve in the middle cut out, so there's nothing, no resistance inside. It's much more smooth in the corners. When you're stopped, yeah, of course it's still gonna be tight because you're turning the tires on the tar. There's a lot of friction there. Once you're moving, it's like way smoother than it was before. It's like butter compared to what it was. I also slowed down the steering rack a little bit by towing it in a little bit. It's not actually towed in, it's only 1/8 of an inch toe out instead of 1/4, so that feels a little bit better. It's not as twitchy going around the corner like, say, a roundabout or something. It's not as twitchy going into that corner. Now it feels really good. Now the only real determining factor if it's going to be better is at the drift track, because that's mainly what this car is used for. I haven't taken it on like super curvy roads and really tried to push it, but as of right now it feels really good and it feels really smooth. Well, all right, I would say that's a successful project of taking out the steering rack and fully depowering it finally. The rear end is feeling pretty good. We're not gonna really know if it's actually like fully fixed until we go to the track. Same with the steering rack. We won't really know how it's gonna feel until we start drifting and getting into transition, if it's faster transitions or if it actually is slower and feels tighter through transitions. Now, that being said, we still have a few things that we need to touch up and finish up before the event. It's just some little things, adding some zip ties here and there just to tighten up fitment just a little bit. And I might adjust the hood a little bit more. It's kind of got a little buckle in the middle of it. So we'll get that all straightened out. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.